Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 90th season of the Cincinnati Civic Orchestra. We want to welcome all of you watching on television. Thank you to Waycross for bringing us out to the community. I wish I could say that we have always done a holiday concert, but in the very early years, during the late 20s and early 30s, to be honest, there wasn't a lot of holiday music to perform that was arranged for orchestra. And although there were always concerts given in late November and early December, you would not today have recognized them as holiday concerts. It was definitely more festive music, but it would be the difference between a heavy romantic overture and one of the lighter Mozart overtures. It was as fun as you could get back then. And then something changed. And starting in the 1930s, we begin to see purchases by the orchestra of true holiday music, true festive music. And we're going to sort of go back through that tradition today. But there was always one thing missing. At least it was missing until 2015. There was nothing in the literature that we could call a symphonic arrangement of the music for the celebration of Thanksgiving here in America. And I asked my dear friend, Ed Howard, to write some music for us for Thanksgiving. And he looked at me and politely smiled and said, any suggestions as to what I should use? A couple church hymns, I guess. It's not like we all sit around the Thanksgiving table and sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And actually, it was in late June of that year that he came to me and said, I'm going to give you a piece called Thanksgiving Medley. We've been playing it every year since. And it is truly an inspiring piece of music because it shows us from the very beginning of the holiday season what the holidays are about coming together, about being with family, about being with community. So we give you Ed Howard's wonderful piece of music for Thanksgiving. right after the Second World War, there was a real feeling of true accomplishment and a really warm feeling within this country welcoming back the young men and women that had so courageously fought across the world for democracy. And musically, what came out of that were some of the funniest and most delightful pieces of music that we have in the literature. In 1949, Johnny Marks wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Now, the reason a lot of these were written at that point was in Atlantic City, in that new town in the desert that they called Las Vegas. There were floor shows and cabarets and hotels springing up. It just didn't seem appropriate during the holidays to be singing Christmas carols. One of the first people to sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was old Blue Eyes himself, Frank Sinatra. Johnny Marks was one of his arrangers. And there's been some people that look back and say, well, we took the sacredness and the family out of the holidays by beginning to take one step at a time to just make it sort of a wonderful time to be happy. This is an arrangement of Rudolph that very much captures the original spirit of when it was written in '49. We're going to play a few more of these early pieces for you. They're absolutely amazing. For some of you in the audience that are older, it's going to take you back a ways to your youth. For some of you that are young, you're going to say, wow, did Grandma and Grandpa really do that? Did they really sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? Did they really hear the first performance? And yes, they did. So we give you this great arrangement of Rudolph. Now we're going to have some real fun. We're going to play for you the first piece of holiday music which the Civic Orchestra ever purchased. It's called Yuletide Echoes. published in 1930 by the famous publishing house of Archer and Company. At that point, they were right on Madison Avenue in New York, actually printing music on Madison Avenue. And they broke all the rules on how the size of the music was. They also broke all the rules from today as to how music was to sound. It's very different in 1930. In 1930, as the world was falling into depression, as Europe was falling into chaos, the music is not as melodious as it was. It isn't as happy, frankly. And for us today to play this, it's quite difficult. It's a period of 20 years where we're not used to what we're hearing. There's a few of you here who were young in the 1930s. And remember the sound of the Paul Whiteman Orchestra. Remember the sound of orchestras that had 2 violins but 7 saxophones, of a different world. But the first time we played this in rehearsal, I could almost see a quieter, a happier world. The world that President Reagan in his last public speech told young people, tell your parents to tell you about how great America was, how beautiful our community was. It was a different time. It was a time when we worked together, and you hear that in the music. We have not played this, as best as I can tell, since 1937. The orchestra's worked very hard to bring you this very historic arrangement by George Sanders. It was certainly a different world in 1930. Think about what you just heard. How many years has it been since, as part of the holidays, you heard O Sanctissima, an Italian carol? 1930s was a time of Italian immigrants. How long has it been since you heard music played as if it was a German band? How long since we've heard Jingle Bells played slow like a march as it was originally written? That was the world of my grandparents, of the younger folks here, of your great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents. A simpler time. I want you to particularly remember the ending just before that strange little Jingle Bells march. O Holy Night, played as America would have heard it during the Civil War. The most popular carol of President Lincoln. Ironically, the most popular carol in the South. Southerners thought the second verse, "Chain shall he break, for the slave is our brother," was referring to the Hebrews being enslaved, not their own people being enslaved. But it was so different. It sounded like it was from the Civil War. It sounded like it was being played by a band marching off to war because nobody had changed it by 1930. It was so revered, it was still played the same way. In a moment, we're going to have Chanel sing O Holy Night in a modern arrangement, and then you'll hear it again as Ed Howard said it for us some years ago. You'll feel the difference, the time, and the changes in our world have made in our music. Now, next we're going to do Frosty the Snowman. Now, Frosty the Snowman, this is a sort of strange arrangement. I have not quite figured it out yet. But for those of you that are Frosty fans, you'll find Frosty in here, but it's not quite the way we usually hear Frosty. But it's a lot of fun. And this is one where it wouldn't hurt if you were singing along because it might help the music along. has been a few years since we have had a soloist to sing O Holy Night. I mentioned to the orchestra at our dress rehearsal that one of the greatest things I probably ever did as a conductor, and maybe one of the biggest mistakes I ever made for the orchestra, one of our past soloists asked me to take a piece of our beautiful stationery and write a letter of recommendation for her so that she could audition for the San Diego Opera Chorus. And she's a great professional soloist now. But we lost a wonderful musician. I've always thought, gee, I maybe shouldn't let people sing so often. Chanel is a relatively new board chairman. She's only been in the position a year now. And she came up to me and she said, why don't we ever sing O Holy Night? And I said, you want to do that? It's not really an easy thing to sing. And she said, yeah, I'd like to try. So we give you O Holy Night, the first two wonderful verses written by Adolphe Adam. This is one of the earliest carols written that we still sing. The words have a great deal of meaning. The music is absolutely beautiful. And this is a truly, truly splendid arrangement. Unfortunately, we had a little technical difficulty, and Chanel's going to have to use the announcing mic. So you'll hear her coming from in front of you and behind you and all over the place. But at least you'll hear her.
Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus.
Well, now we're going to have some real fun. There are a number of stories that go with this piece of music, probably none of which are true. But I'll tell you what we know for sure. Wolfgang Mozart's father was named Leopold. Leopold was not a very pleasant person. In fact, Leopold kept little Mozart, little Wolfgang, being about 7 or 8 years old until he turned him into being 21, because he sold him as a child prodigy until he just got too big, and they had to admit, well, he really wasn't 8 years old. He paraded him all over Europe. Actually, a young Mozart sat in Marie Antoinette's lap and called her mommy because his father put him up to it. And he made a lot of money off of little Mozart. And finally, when Mozart was about 22, he said, I've had enough of this. And he ran off to Vienna and got married and became the wild and crazy Mozart we know. Now, as he left for Vienna, his papa gave him some presents, basically some music that he really didn't know what to do with. There were parts of symphonies, there were 3-string quartets, there was a couple fanfares, and Mozart, not really liking his dad much, shoved them in a case and took them with him and said, thanks, Dad. Danke, Papa. And sort of forgot about them. Well, one of them was a really nice string quartet. And Mozart happened to show it to his teacher, Franz Joseph Haydn. And Haydn said, I really like that. Well, take it. You know, Dad gave it to me, I'll give it to you. And as the story goes, Haydn sort of forgot about it too. It was sitting with a bunch of other music on his desk, when on December 22nd, or thereabouts, after he had moved off to London, the Prince of Wales walked into his little apartment at Windsor Castle and said, tomorrow night we're having a party for all the children. They're giving gifts, and I'd like some music that would be fun for them. And he turned around and walked back out the door. And although Haydn wrote a lot of fun music, he didn't write children's music, and he didn't quite know what to do. And then he remembered this string quartet that he'd been thinking about, that Leopold Mozart had written, given to Wolfgang. Wolfgang had given it to him. He put his own name on it, incidentally. And he added toy instrument parts to it. Now, here's where the story gets messy. Some people say the servants played the toy instruments. Some people say the brass and woodwind players of the Royal Orchestra played the toy instruments. And some people think the children played the toy instruments. I'd like to think everybody sort of joined in and had a good time. But it absolutely is genius what he did. There's this very formal part in the minuet, beam, ba-dum, and then there's 2 rests, rest, rest. And what Haydn does is beam, ba-dum, cuckoo. Where he got the cuckoo call, there it is. You do not know how hard it is to find a cuckoo call in the right key. There's toy trumpets. There's little nightingale bird calls. There's triangles. There's toy drums. And so all of our people that play so beautifully now get to go back to their childhood and not get lost because they're laughing so hard. And I have to figure out where they all are at any one point because they're never quite where they're supposed to be, but it's okay because it still sounds great. So we give you, for the first time in about 15 years, it's the first time we've had a crazy enough group of people out there that they do it, we give you the wonderful Toy Symphony. just leaves you speechless, doesn't it? But we're going to do that 3 more times. Incidentally, for those of you that really want a little nightingale whistle that you can put water in it and make the, whatever that sound is, I guess it's the sound of a nightingale. At one point we had about 6 of them, and we're down to like 2 because people take them home. So we just ordered 10 more from Amazon. So anybody who wants to play the nightingale and come to another concert, we're going to have plenty of little nightingale whistles. Were any of you here years ago when we played the bar scene from Star Wars and handed out kazoos to the whole orchestra and to the whole audience? Oh, it was scary. It really was. Nightingales sound much better than kazoos, I'll tell you that much. Well, we've still got that box of kazoos. It's amazing. Well, we always have to end the first half of the concert with something. And for many years, after I started this tradition of doing holiday concerts every year, and then they multiplied into 2 every year, and 3, and now 4, we always ended with Festive Sounds of Hanukkah and Christmas Festival by Leroy Anderson. And again, my dear friend Ed Howard came up to me one day and borrowed the score to Leroy Anderson's A Christmas Festival. I didn't know what he was up to, but give us your smile, Ed. That smile, yeah, that smile. He gave me that smile. I knew I was in trouble. And he came in and he had a list of holiday music. And he said, you know what? These are all the songs that Leroy Anderson didn't use in A Christmas Carol. And I'm going to make a way to end the first half of the concerts with just the songs he didn't use. And it immediately occurred to me that the reason he didn't use them was they weren't the pick of the litter. And some months later, back in 1990, I got this wonderful score from Ed. Now, this is before we had computers to do this for us. I've never seen such beautiful penmanship in my whole life. Every note and every part for the orchestra was handwritten out. And I passed it out, and it's like, Leroy Anderson didn't know what he was missing. It's just great. And it's been a few years since we played this because Ed's written so much wonderful music for us and for other groups. And so I decided, well, it's been about, what now? 6 years since we've done this. I thought, time to do it again. Because really it did sort of start the blossoming of the wonderful holiday concert tradition that I have been privileged to build with these wonderful musicians. So we give you Ed Howard's version of A Christmas Showcase. Now, again, you've just heard O Holy Night 2 very different ways. Ed really does an amazing thing with O Holy Night at the end of this arrangement. And it's absolutely remarkable the way he brings and layers the music and takes the most sacred of the holidays and interweaves it with what we might say is the most commercial of the holidays. And lets us all have a view of how it's all one big, beautiful, beautiful time to be together. We'll be back then in about 10 minutes for the second half of the concert. Second half is shorter than the first half, but some really fantastic music on it too. We hope you all stay. I don't know why you'd want to go out and play in the rain, so we'll see you after Christmas Showcase in about 10 minutes. we're going to start the second half with Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, which I just found out was originally written for performance during the Thanksgiving holiday, not the Christmas Hanukkah end of the holiday season. I got to thinking about the words, and yes, they work just as well for going to Grandma's house on that sleigh to have Thanksgiving dinner. Let it snow, let it snow. The weather outside is frightful. The fire is so delightful. Yes, it works for the whole holiday season. Real nice arrangement, real pretty music. One more time to look back into our history. During the many wonderful years that John Barosset conducted this orchestra, many of you would remember John as the business manager and principal second violin of our great symphony orchestra. He's one of the teachers to a number of our violinists on the stage, and when my teacher, Maestro Carlson, was traveling, John took my lessons, and there wasn't a kinder and more wonderful man that I've ever met in my whole life, and it was a great loss to the musical community when he passed away. A strange thing happened when we celebrated our 60th anniversary. We still had a few musicians living that had played the first concert. And we sent out a letter, and I copied it to the past conductors and some of the people we'd played premieres of music to, asking them to come too for the concert. And it came out time for the 5 people we believed were still alive from the original performance to come out on stage. And Maestro Barosset rolled out in his wheelchair. I looked at him and I said, "John, your name's not in the first program." He said, "Oh, yes, it is." He says, "I played third clarinet. I was a senior in high school. I wasn't playing the violin yet." They told me I'd never find a job as a clarinetist, so I should learn to play the violin. And I looked back at the program, and there he was. He'd played with the orchestra since day one. And that's a wonderful feeling, because I've played with the orchestra since I was in high school, and now I'm, like he was, privileged to conduct. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of a group like this. We have an amazing piece of music that was added to our repertoire in 1939, written in 1938 by Rosario Bourdon. Nobody knows much about him. He seems to be a distant relative of the Russian composer. It's delightful music. And one of the things that John Barassa told me when I visited him shortly before he passed on, he said, there are two Christmas pieces that you never want to lose sight of. He said, never let anybody convince you that Leroy's Sleigh Ride is just hokey stuff. He said it's the best thing he wrote. He never said Leroy Anderson because Leroy and John were close friends. I wish I'd been able to meet Leroy Anderson. But then he said there's a piece in the library called Christmastide. At some point, you have to conduct it. And I remembered that after all these years, and there it was, tucked away behind a bunch of other stuff, and we got the parts cleaned up. And this is really very special music, because this is music at the very beginning of the modern era of music as we know it today. It's from music like this that we have John Williams in Star Wars. It's from music like this that we have all of our popular music that we hear played on the radio. And it's just delightful to look back and think of the wonderful musicians who we met when we were young that played this music, to remember them, for a few of them that are still there, to visit them occasionally. It's a wonderful thing to have these memories. So we ask you to join us in sort of thinking back to all the concerts you've been at. And for those of you hearing us for the first time or here for the first time, think of all the concerts we'll give you in the future. We give you Christmastide. Now I want all of you to take a quick look in your programs where we have both the spring and the winter concerts and the dates and places listed. We're going to be doing some really exciting music. The Schubert Great Symphony on the winter concert, absolutely an amazing work. It scores right behind Beethoven's Fifth and right in front of the New World as far as our audience favorites. It is an amazing work. And we'll be premiering a new work called Four, F-O-U-R, Horns to the Fore, F-O-R-E. A solo work for our horn section, which Ed Howard has written to honor these great musicians back here. Great, great concert. We're also going to be playing, to open the concert, the Don Giovanni Overture by Mozart, which was the work we opened our very first concert in 1929 with. And then in the spring, one of my dear friends, one of our past conductors, the great concert pianist Eugene Flem, is going to come up and join us from Florida and play with us for the first time the Schumann Piano Concerto. And you've got to think about this because he's considerably older than I am. He's going to be playing it for the first time. He called me and he said, I want to learn one more concerto before I die, and I want to play it during the 90th season. And I said, well, which one are you going to learn for the 100th season? And he said, we'll see about that. So Gene's coming up, and with that, we're going to play the wonderful Reformation Symphony of Felix Mendelssohn. So some great concerts. And this summer, we're going to be playing largely patriotic and American music. So it's been a few years since we've been doing Sousa and all those guys, and I keep hearing from the audience, when are you going to play John Philip Sousa again? Well, give us a year or so. We've been doing movie music and Broadway music. It's time. So get us on the calendar. If you're not on the mailing list, fill out the form and get on the mailing list. Now, there are 3 more holiday concerts. Thursday, Sunday, Thursday. We're going to make it, but I'm sure all of you have friends that don't know about us, and you're going to tell them to come, and we're going to have those halls filled for 3 more concerts with this great music. So thank you all for being here. We're going to play a part, a very small part, of an amazing piece of music called Hansel and Gretel. Now, this was written by a fellow named Humperdinck, not the modern guy that sings with his chest hanging out and gyrates. Not our new Elvis, Mr. Humperdinck. This was the real Mr. Humperdinck. And he wrote this on the story of Hansel and Gretel for his children, for a children's play for the kids in the neighborhood, and a little orchestra he put together. And it's beautiful music, playing just a small snippet of the prelude. But this is some of the prettiest music we'll play, just to remind you all that we don't just do pops and holiday, but we also do the real stuff. So we give you Humperdinck's prelude to Hansel and Gretel. Well, we're not quite to the end. We're not quite to the big ending. Not quite there. We've got this silly little piece called Here Comes Santa Claus. Now, we were rehearsing this the other night, and honestly, Santa Claus came into the rehearsal room. Some of you were here when we played Santa's Reindeer Team, written by one of our greatest Santa Clauses. John was in the neighborhood, and Santa walked into the rehearsal hall. And for those of you that don't know Santa, he's Santa. I mean, his real name, but he thinks he's Santa, and he looks like Santa, and he is Santa. And right when we're playing this, he just walks right in because he wants to give me a holiday card. And it's like, it really occurred to me that's what it is all about. Those wonderful little surprises that make this wonderful season so very, very, very special. So this is a cute little Here Comes Santa Claus, and then I'll say a couple thank yous, and we'll give you the big ending. The first 2 years I conducted this orchestra, we were really hard-pressed to put any good settings for symphony orchestra of the music of Hanukkah. Just wasn't much out there. And then I heard that Bill Holcomb was doing an arrangement of the melodies most often celebrated by our Jewish neighbors during Hanukkah. And I immediately ordered the score, and I immediately understood that this piece of music, Festive Sounds of Hanukkah, and Leroy Anderson's amazing Christmas Festival Overture, I always thought they fit together like a glove fitting on a hand. They're both an amazing mixture of the sacred music of the season and of just the plain happy holiday music. They're both just glorious arrangements to play, fun to listen to. And a few years ago, we had the opportunity to replace our Christmas festival that we had used for close to 35 years with the original edition that had been premiered by the Boston Pops Orchestra. It's ever so slightly longer, but it is such a richer piece of music. And I think what happened was Anderson thought it was a little too difficult for school and community and college orchestras to play, so he really simplified it. And also the range at the time of the voicing of the orchestra was greater than what sound systems in the early shopping centers could handle. And so he sort of compressed it. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at the original score, what that first audience heard under Arthur Fiedler at the Boston Pops, with Leroy Anderson sitting in the audience. And what struck me was not how much more beautiful it was, but how much more the same, the little counter melodies, the little things that Anderson had done, were what Holcomb had done with his Festive Sounds of Hanukkah. The similarity of music that all of us treasure during the holidays. I know many in the TV audience and a few of you here probably are not familiar with Hanukkah. It's the story of the people of Israel taking the city of Jerusalem and, more importantly, the Temple Mount and God's holiest place back from pagans that had conquered them. After they had taken Jerusalem back, the first thing they had to do was purify the temple. Take the graffiti off the walls, get rid of the smell and the stench from human sacrifice and all different sorts of horrible things that had gone on there, and make it ready to celebrate. Just before they were done, just as things were almost right, and after the rabbis had lit the holy lamp with the purified oil above the temple altar, the generals came and told the rabbis that the enemy had returned and there were a lot more of them, and they were afraid things weren't going to work out real well. The rabbis prayed for the brave men that defended the walls of Jerusalem. And the next day, the generals came back and said, "Good news, we've made it another day." And the rabbis didn't seem very interested, and they said, "We don't understand, but we have no oil to keep the light burning above the great altar of the temple, yet it still burns." The same thing happened the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And finally, the generals came and said, "We've beaten them. They've gone home. We've sent men out already to bring oil for the light." And they looked up and the light was still burning. And the rabbi said, "All these days and nights, God has shown his light upon his people that have been faithful to him." That's why there are 8 lights that are lit on the menorah for each of those days when the light continued to burn with no oil to make it burn. And that's exactly the same celebration that we as Christians celebrate. God bringing the light into the world. God giving us a gift. God telling us if we're faithful, if we are faithful, he will be with us. He will show us the way. And these 2 pieces of music, for all that I thought they fit like a hand in a glove, I finally realized that they don't fit like a hand in a glove. They fit like 2 hands praying. I'd like you all to observe just a moment of silence before we end this concert, to think of your friends that we've lost this year. Think of all of those who have suffered in the storms and the fires, and those that will still suffer. Give a word of prayer for our young men and women that defend this country. Pray for all of our leaders that they may find their way together. Pray for each of us that in our families we can come together. And this music can lead us. We give you Festive Sounds of Hanukkah. We give you a Christmas festival, and we wish you all a blessed New Year. Dexter's birthday.